Welcome to Breaking Banks.
Hey, welcome to another Breaking Banks. This week, very excited to do a review of the book, Think Like a Brand, Not a Bank. Jim Marous joins me as we interview Allison, Netzer, and Liz High about why they wrote this book. And I don't know the last time that you've looked at a bank brand and said, wow, that blew my socks off. Well, they break down what banks get wrong and how can they be more customer-centric. And then in the second segment, Brett King and his Futurist co-host interview Glenn White on how brand and advertising will evolve in the metaverse. Are you headed to Finovate? If so, check out FinTech Fight Club. Lindsay Davis of Atomic battles Mary Winooski of Bankrate in a not-to-be-missed battle to the end. Interestingly enough, as I was reading the book, when I put my banker hat on, a lot of it felt a bit like blasphemy when you talk through some of the things on what should be intuitive versus not. But when I put my tech hat on, I'm like, well, this is obvious. I'm realizing it's contextual, right? It's not obvious to the banker that these are the rules the world play by. And you have some great principles that we'll get into in a second. But where I want to actually start is one place that you really hooked me. And Liz, I think this was one of your big inputs into the book was you have a chapter titled Don't Be Customer First, right? Now that's blasphemy to the tech world. What could you possibly mean? Because everyone knows you're supposed to be customer first now.
Yeah. Well, I think it's something that I've been committed to pretty much all through my career is that the best business is the business that gets the concept of the fair exchange of value, where the bank achieves what the bank needs to achieve, the customer achieves what the customer needs to achieve. And you can't make good decisions if you make all your decisions bank first or customer first. So really the principle is around the idea that you need to work out where value exchange occurs. And if you can work that out, those are the best decisions.
I'd say you're a venture-backed tech startup if you're customer first, because you don't worry about business model. And you're definitely a bank if all you do is put the institution first. Now, you guys broke down, maybe Allison, you can take this. Mm-hmm. What's the bank's intuition? Kind of like their script of the four holy grails of what they're going to do that is the bank-centric model.
Sure. So, in the book, we talk about sometimes doing the counterintuitive thing. So to your point, we've got to kind of ground on what is the typical bank mindset. And, of course, it's about risk, profit, compliance. And none of these are bad things on their own, but they are things. They are not a mindset. And that's where the limitation occurs when your mindset is compliant, when your mindset is risk. Those are factors, but not a mindset. So doing the counterintuitive thing sometimes means, hey, let's just pretend for a second. What if we had no compliance department? What if risk wasn't an issue? What could we do? And it doesn't mean you do whatever that is, but start there with your mindset and work backwards, as opposed to trying to carry water uphill and changing a traditional mindset into something more modern and more brand focused.
It's interesting. You talk about that, but isn't that the problem with every element of banking right now? We talk about AI, we talk about branding, we talk about customer safety, everything we're talking about. We need the bankers to get out of the banker mindset. Now that's really hard because, again, the leadership of these banks have been doing this for 35 years. They're white males that play golf together when they're management trainees. And to get those people out of their comfort zone, because even when they started, branding was, I wouldn't say looked down upon, but was thought as being the soft stuff. I mean, when I started in banking, it was all about advertising and branding. And then we've gone completely the other way. And they work together, don't they?
They do. And, brand is not soft and fluffy, right? That's something we talk about a lot in the book. And I think changing the banker mindset, changing anyone's mindset, you have to meet them where they are. And so what Liz and I try to do in the book is outside of philosophy and sometimes logic, is making the business case for brand. Successful brands speak the language of returns every time. It is a sound business decision, even if you think it's crayons. It is a sound business decision, and we provide a lot of that data-backed research in the book.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think I really like is the idea that if you're going to make great decisions, you sometimes have to have very different approaches sitting around a table. So to your point, Jim, there's a tradition of, the bank mindset and how it's grown up, and it's totally valuable. But adding a different mindset into that conversation makes a huge difference. So one of my favorite examples is if you look at, an adjacent industry. So you think about Patagonia. A lot of my income goes on their equipment and their clothing. But one of the things I love about them is they have a director of philosophy. And one of the questions that we ask in the book is, can you imagine how different your board meeting would sound if sitting in that room with everybody else was someone who actually was the director of philosophy? And that might seem like a real stretch, but actually in the banking world, it's the same as, why not have someone who is the chief digital officer, or it's someone who is the chief cultural officer? Then that makes a huge difference.
Building on that, if I hadn't thought of a chief philosophy officer or director of philosophy, but if I think of what sets Sunrise Banks apart in, what they do, the fact that they have Becca as the chief branding officer, it's like, the first time we met, we talked like, so it's like the CMO. She's like, no, not really. We have marketing people, and that is different. This sits across all of this because our brand is our people, and our brand is our product, our brand is our messaging. Like the brand crosses all of that. And is that what a director of philosophy would do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's about the mindset that says, who are we as an organization? And if your boardroom is populated by the head of retail, it's populated by the head of lending, it's populated by another very specific siloed mindset, that you have a set of conversations that are based around that. If you have someone that is about people, or someone that is about, the essence of your business, i.e. the brand, then you'll talk about different things. It's not going to change what you do, but it will change the way that you think about it.
Yeah. Jim, I want to throw this to you because you talk to even more bankers than I do on a daily basis, for at least for a number of years. If you asked a bank that question about who are you and what are you, like, all I can think is 95% of banks are going to respond, we're a bank.
Or they're going to give you their tagline.
Yes.
I mean, think about this. I mean, when you guys were talking, I'm thinking, we always want to pare it down to the most basic part, which is sometimes a tagline. And employees see this. I was talking to Synovus Bank the other day, and I said, how do you close branches? They said, well, the first thing we do, we make sure the employees understand why we're closing the branch and that they're still safe, so that they buy into it. And I said, oh my God, that seemed to be so counterintuitive to me, but then it became so obvious that if your employees don't buy in that they're okay and they're going to be okay with their customers' mindset, then they're going to undermine it for the first time they hear it, saying, oh, by the way, we're closing this branch and I'm going to lose my job and I don't know why. And the thing is, if you don't sell the whole concept, and that's part of the branding, if you don't sell the whole concept that this is good for the customer, not customer first, this is good for the customer's going to return that goodness back to us, we've lost that. I mean, I was going to ask both of you, and it's not something we've discussed before, but can we make it so a bank brand is something somebody can be passionate about? I mean,
Absolutely.
I think about my Nikes. I think about my OnClouds. I think about the Tommy Bahama shirts and slacks I wear. I think about the Lululemon, and I'm passionate about those brands. I will go out of my way to wait until the next good thing comes out, rather than buy something that I need from the wrong brand. And that's passion. But I'm certainly not passionate about either one of my bank brands. On the other hand, I am passionate about Acorns. I mention them probably every podcast and webinar I do because I really like what they do for me. But how do you do that where it doesn't get watered down to being a tagline that the chairman says, oh, I like that tagline. I'm going to be on TV. I'll talk about it. How do you do that?
Well, I think you can. So I just want to say at the beginning, in case people stop listening to when I'm talking, you absolutely can. And it is absolutely possible. A lot of what we hit on there was that branding is seen sometimes as only being external, and how you feel about something internally manifests externally. So going to your branch example. So the job of brand is, I mean, your employees are your first customers. And in some cases, many cases, your most important customers. So when you're talking about a campaign or you're talking about changing a brand or creating a brand, it actually needs to start with the internal conviction and the internal brand campaign, essentially. That's how you build that momentum. You know, we all know brands that by virtue of their conviction may not even be the best product. They're incredibly successful. Whereas some of the best products on the market, no one's even heard of, right? Because it's internal conviction. So I think you can get to that mindset and get away from the, you know, we have an exercise in the book about, okay, think about your bank. What's the first word that comes to mind? You know, and kind of go through it and then doing the same with consumer brands. And I think it's possible, but it's really seeing branding as something that's both internal and external. And marketers making sure that we're being responsible. The chairman didn't learn the tagline on his or her own. We told it to them. Yeah. Did we tell them anything else? And so we also have to be responsible for that internally.
Well, it's interesting too. Is there any industry that has so many companies selling the exact same thing?
Exactly the same thing.
I mean,
no
exactly.
Difference.
It's not like, oh, by the way, I'm the linen shirts, or I'm the sportswear company, or I'm the athletic shoe. No, we're all selling exactly the same things. So how do you, and I'll go back to you, Allison, is how do you make this so it's not a campaign, but it's an overarching brand that all campaigns build on forever? I mean, Nike hasn't changed their brand. They've changed their message. They're, you know, when they come out with a brand new slogan, or not a slogan, but a new commercial, it's still the Nike. It's right. It's just a different perspective of what Budweiser, you know, it's still Budweiser. Right. They just come out with a cooler way of talking about the exact same brand. How do we do that when everybody's got the same exact products?
Right. Yeah, no, there's only so many ways you can check your balance, right? So, but I think that goes back to the bank first versus the brand first mindset. Yeah. If you have a bank first mindset, you will think all we have to sell is what everyone else has to sell. So we must create a campaign that makes the same thing seem different. That's a bank first mindset. Having the same products as everyone else in a brand first mindset is actually an incredible opportunity because you get to do the fun work, right? We talk about product isn't what it used to be. You get to really think about the positioning, the messaging, the data and the insights, all of those kind of ingredients that go into making or baking a brand. You get to do that, and you differentiate by focusing on the brand and what the brand means and the outcomes it can drive for employees, the outcomes it can drive for your consumers and your small businesses. It kind of gets away from that binary thinking, right? Like either we go all in on this product and we, you know, put an Easter bunny on it, or we don't. And we go to it's this binary thinking that you lose a lot of momentum on. Whereas having a more holistic view of, you know, and Liz knows from working with me for a long time, like campaigns, I don't believe in campaigns. Campaigns are like, I'm going to breathe today. It does nothing. It is absolutely nothing except for promote a bank first mindset. Like I hate campaigns.
Well, this reminds me. So my wife works in advertising. I think three of you knew that. Last year we were on a hike, and this is sadly the nerdy kinds of things we do when we're on romantic couple getaways together. Is we were having a conversation about marketing within banking. They have a couple, marquee banks. They have some smaller banks. So she's just been digging in and understanding the team. And we were having this discussion around, strategy and positioning. And she was stunned to find out how many banks and credit unions there are in this country. And
So are we.
Yes, so are we. And then throw in the neobanks, right? And the alternative lenders, and the fact that you can bank with Amazon for all intents and purposes. And she said, are there enough unique positionings to support that many? I said, well, actually, probably no. But I think at the heart, one of the problems that they exist right now, looking so much the same, is they all approach it from the I am a bank or I am a credit union, and they don't have different missions. And Liz, I know mission is a big thing for you. Talk to us about the mission within financial services.
Yeah, so I think that, again, sort of touching on Jim's point that, people get really hung up on the taglines. They also get really hung up on their mission statements. And one of the things that we do in the book is we actually show 5 or 6, banks' mission statements, and you really can't tell the difference between any of them because they're all about serving the customer, loving the community, being part of, the geography that they live in. But those are not really missions. Brands have, again, coming back to Patagonia, they're about changing the world, and they're unafraid of having that as a mission. And if you start to think about a mission being about what really matters to people, what really matters to you as an institution, then that comes back to that whole kind of a fair exchange piece. So imagine if your product wasn't, a credit card, it wasn't a savings account, it actually was what you were doing for the world. The example I've used before is kind of Studio Bank. If you think about really driving, many of the kind of gig worker banks that are emerging, the Lilies of this world, that have recognized a set of challenges, issues, or emotive concepts, aspiration being the big one, that people will drive towards, because then banking doesn't become a function. Your solution doesn't become a feature, it becomes part of the lifestyle, and it's part of what matters, and it's part of people's day-to-day thinking. And that's the real shift to brand and the shift to mission thinking in banking. And I think we feel that that's the big opportunity that lots of banks have to pivot fairly quickly.
Jim, I'm curious, as you think about mission and the number of boardrooms you've been in having this discussion, in how many mission statements you've seen, sadly, most of them, reside, or mission values are hanging on the back of the bathroom door, or in the break room, I guess. How many banks do you think before versus now really get the importance of mission, and that mission does not equal community, as Liz said?
That's interesting, because I don't think they understand it. But I think more and more financial institutions now are becoming keen to segmentation and serving certain communities much better. KeyBank puts out there, and they do it much better with the medical community and tech community, especially on their West Coast branches. I just had the good fortune 2 weeks in a row. I interviewed Rob Curtis from Daylight, which focuses on the LGBT community. And today I interviewed Corey LeBlanc from Locality. And all of a sudden I'm realizing that it's really easy to do branding and mission statements and all that when you aren't serving everybody. And oh, by the way, serving a community, everybody in a community, is not segmentation. It's really hard to brand yourself as the friendliest bank, as opposed to the bank that's really looking out for these people. And what's interesting about digital, and it makes it easier for branding, is that you now can serve a very micro segment and expand that to the universe. And the universe can just be the United States and have vastly more customers. And when you start looking at embedded banking and BASS and banking as a service, you all of a sudden realize, geez, it really is even more important now to have branding, because you can really micro focus on who you're going to be best for, and then find all the others in other areas that are trying to be the best for those as well. I mean, if I want to be the bank of athletes, then I want to hook onto Nike's wagon. You know, I want Nike to hook onto my wagon. I want to give embedded banking to Nike, and all of a sudden, my brand has meaning. But if I'm saying I want to be the bank for all tennis shoe owners, again, it's really hard to build a specialty or a special message where there's value exchange.
So let's pivot to that for a second, Jim, because if Finastra had that study that 85% of all banks say they're going to get into banking as a service over the next 12 to 18 months, which we all know it's going to take longer than that. But now if 85% of you are doing it, we're back to, this whole idea of how are you differentiating, and it's further exasperated. Yeah, I can't say that word. So it's further complicated by the fact that you're not the customer facing brand now, right? So how do you build brand and mission when you're not the one interfacing with the customer?
It's who you select to partner with, I think.
Yeah.
I'm just going to oversimplify it that, if I say I'm the financial institution for the digital small businesses, and then go out in the marketplace and pick up every organization that wants to embed or to be bank of the service, then my brand is about as hollow as it was to begin with. I mean, what do you guys think? Liz, and Allison, you guys are the experts in this.
Well, I would not go that far, but my acronym is different. I don't think it should be banking as a service. Banking is a service. And I think we all need to have that mindset. It is a service already. And so, but I mean, Jason, I think it's a good question. And it goes back to, again, these sort of pre-held notions, this binary thinking that brand is something that is external to a consumer, right? And, it all depends on your customer set. Like we talked about employees before. In BAS, your customer set is different, right? It's a different customer set, a different niche or a different segment. And you still follow the same principles and processes that you would for, a standard kind of B2C play. It really is very similar. So I think banking is a service, and that's where I'd like to see us go. But you're right. If we're not careful and we practice some binary thinking, we'll be having this conversation X time from now about how do we differentiate in BAS. And Liz, I know you've got some thoughts on this too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, the more that, particularly as I'm kind of thinking about how banking is a service emerges, it's really, thinking that consumer and other tech companies have been doing a few years ago. I've done a lot of work with kind of Microsoft historically, looking at what their future kind of tech, positioning should be. And, 2 or 3 years ago, they were really leaning very strongly into this concept of B2B to X. So that as marketers or as brands, you're not really leaning into, I market direct to consumers or I market direct to businesses. Successful brands, and I think any bank that's thinking about, BAS as a solution, it's B2B to X. And you need to start with, what does that end customer want to do? How does your customer then want to do that? And then how do you solve both sets of problems? And to me, that's what a successful bank brand will be in the future. You're solving the B2B to X problem, not just B2B or B2C.
That also then requires an understanding of X's problem, though, too, right? Which, if we already struggle to not be FI or bank centric, now we actually need to become really good cultural anthropologists of a second order.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is a tall order, but yes, it can be done.
And, it also really opens the door for open banking, because then you can reinforce the branding, the message, and the value proposition through the partnerships that you build to serve that X in the B2B to X. Where, I again get back to the conversation I had with Daylight Bank, and they're building all these partnerships with other organizations that can support the community they're trying to serve. That can be the same for those banks that want to serve the small business community, maybe simply the publishers in the small business community, or the real estate developers in the small business community. There's a bank in Turkey that once, really served the agricultural set by bringing together the financing people for the equipment, the horticulturalists talking about the ground and the earth itself, the meteorologists that talk about the weather, the people that sold seed. All of a sudden, the bankers in there too. But these people are not connected except in this open banking environment, which is to serve, to Liz's point, the X, and whoever that X is. And then it becomes something you're passionate about. All of a sudden, you think about if you're on the other side, you're a farmer that no longer has to go to 7 or 8 different storefronts, miles and miles and miles away, and maybe doesn't even have access to people in some of those categories. All of a sudden, there is nothing you could do that could get me away from that financial institution that brought this party together.
Right.
Well,
I think, I know you're kind of half joking there, Jason, with the cultural anthropologist. And so it seems a bit daunting, but this is where data comes in, right? And data and brand are not separate things. You absolutely can, if you think about the money that is spent in this industry to have finite detail on checking account holders, and you were telling me that we can't possibly find out data about farmers, I'm not going for that, because we can. It's in our wheelhouse. It's in what we have the capabilities to do today. It's a different lens and a different input. So,
yeah. It's interesting too. It's part of branding is the ability to say no.
Mm-hmm.
So not to accept everybody that comes. I'm Jason, I'm sure you're in the same situation, but with my podcast, the number of people that say, I want to be on the show. And yes, I could make more money, I could hit more people. But the reality is, if you stay focused on your brand and say no, that allows you to stay on point, as opposed to continually saying, I'll take all comers. I mean, heck, the way most of us played Twitter at the beginning. I'll take any follower. And then all of a sudden you go, no, I can't talk to all those people. And we know the people out there that will be the specialist in everything in order to get ranked to the top of every list. You go like, you can't be the best at everything. At some point, you got to decide, what am I going to be passionate about? What's my brand going to represent? And I know, Liz and Allison, you do that in your daily life, in your real jobs. You turn down opportunities that you go, yeah, it would be great, but at the end of the day, usually these things explode. They just do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the kind of the other side of that is, and I talk about this kind of concept of, creating honeypots. So if you're creating a brand and a story, then it's less about, rejecting people, and it's more about attracting the right people, because you're solving a very unique problem. And it comes back to what you said, Jason, all these people that are selling exactly the same products. But what they're not doing is solving problems. What they are doing is they're selling products. What brands do very well is create things that attract the right people. They attract the most profitable customers because they're solving a highly specific problem. Coming back to your Nikes, if you're a runner, you know exactly the kind of shoe that you want, you know how it has to fit. And you know that Nike have got so much data and they've invested so much in understanding you as a runner, that if you turn up there looking for your running shoe, it's going to fit, it's going to be the right shoe, and you don't care about all the other things that are out there. So you don't have to say no, because you know that you can say yes to the brand.
Yeah.
Well, but I think part of that, and this goes back to the original part of saying no, is your brand can't and shouldn't resonate with everyone. Jim, I think you drove that point home well. And it's hard because we try and be all things to all people, and then we're nothing but a tagline to everyone.
Nobody wants to say no to a friend or somebody that could become a friend.
Mm-hmm.
True to that. But before we run out of time, I got this phenomenal thing in the mail today.
Yay, I'm so excited.
I love my digital advanced copy, that could read, but I'm excited to get this up on the bookshelf so people will see it. Where can people find how to think like a brand, not a bank? And if they want to learn more and engage with you, how do they do that?
Absolutely. So our website is thinklikeabrandbook.com. So you can get the book there. You can talk to Liz and I, and we put all of the data from the book into a PowerPoint that is beautiful that you can use to talk to people in your institution. And there's going to be more of that coming. So we know the challenge, we know the struggle. And so we're just trying to put everything out there we can on the website to help out.
Well, thanks, special co-host Jim from the Financial Brand, coming to join, and Banking Transform podcast. Always worth a listen as well. But thank you all. Exciting stuff, and glad you're helping change the industry.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Hey there, welcome back. You're listening to The Futurists with Brett King and myself, Rob Tercek. And this week our guest is Glenn White. And Glenn and I were having a real interesting discussion a moment ago about who owns the brand and who's going to manage the process of explaining that brand or conveying that brand in new media. This is a relevant topic for our listeners because the very near future is going to involve completely different kinds of media, stuff that most of us don't spend time in today, but very likely will be in the next 5 years. I'm talking specifically about the metaverse. We've heard this term so many times lately, ever since Facebook's big announcement that they're changing the name of the company to Meta, and they're going to focus on being less of a social network company and more of a metaverse company. It seems like mass media has been fascinated by this notion of what a metaverse is. So Glenn, do me a favor, share with us your view of what you think the metaverse actually is. Can you give us a proper definition?
Whenever somebody says metaverse, I hear internet, so you'll forgive me. It's in my head, it's the evolution of what the internet is. I tend to think of metaverse as a brand play more than a practical product play. Like, people talk about being a metaverse company. What does that even mean?
Yeah.
I don't like. You can't tell
What do
me
you
what
think
the
it
metaverse
means?
is. What do I think?
Yeah, what do you think it means? Because it's such an undefined term. So when someone says, think of us as a metaverse company, what are they trying to get us to think of?
Trying to separate your money from your wallet. I think
Fair.
I tend to, if you're talking about practical problems, like, I tend to think of things in terms of practical problems, right? Like, I tend to think of, when somebody says metaverse, what I hear relationship, right? Like, there is a relationship between X and Y, and that goes down a very, 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 very deep rabbit hole, right? So we were just talking about the relationship between brands and players, or brands and consumers, or brands and, aficionados, or whatever that is. That relationship is how that relationship takes place, and what that means is sort of the goal of what a metaverse wants to be. No different than the internet in many ways, right? You think about the internet.
Okay, I hear you. But for the folks who are listening who are still a little bit puzzled because we haven't actually given a satisfactory definition of the internet, of the metaverse, let me offer this. So the metaverse is proposed to be an immersive 3D space. Some people call it a virtual world or an immersive world, but the idea is it's all around you. So unlike the internet, which we look at on the screens, so it's, internet's typically contained inside of a rectangle. And even today, the internet consists mostly of rectangles, whether they're rectangles that have video or rectangles that have text pages. But the metaverse is meant to be immersive and real-time 3D, meaning you can move through it. It's above you, it's below you, around you. It's a space you can move through. And you might think of that as like a video game. Today, 3 billion people are playing real-time 3D video games, so they're quite familiar with that. And given that fact that so many people are already doing video games on the web, seems like a logical extension that those worlds, those game worlds, could also include other things that aren't games. Entertainment, we're starting to see concerts in the metaverse, art shows. Some people are suggesting you can do education there. Some people say you're going to be able to work in the metaverse. Now, Glenn, when you hear all that, I hear you. Yes, of course, it's about a relationship, right? That's what you say when you hear metaverse, you hear relationship. I get that. But I think what we're talking about is a relationship between the metaverse platform and the end user. And that brings us back to the concept of intermediation, because that platform wants to get between the user and the brand. That's
why I reject that definition for a couple of reasons. One, are you telling me that blind people are not going to be able to take part in the metaverse?
Because the way I've just framed it, sure. I mean, can they play video games?
Yes, and do.
Okay, so in the same affordances that are make it possible for blind people to play video games, they'll probably exist for the metaverse, wouldn't they?
Well, I mean, it would depend, right? And that's kind of what I'm getting at is you're talking about sort of the computer human interface that creates that. And my point is that the relationships of the data underneath, the engagement with the data is really what matters. The form that it takes, right, is less important than the relationship with the data and the interaction with the data. So like when you talk about it being an immersive 3D world, like, okay, but my life is an immersive 3D world. What value? I have a spreadsheet that's in front of me. The value of 3D representations of data aside, it's a spreadsheet. It doesn't have to be 3D. And so there's a whole bunch of stuff there that sort of begs the question is, what's actually the relationship between the individual and the content that they're consuming? Let's stop using data, let's start using content. So how you consume that content, if you're focused on the form of how people are consuming that content, you've sort of missed the point, right? And that's sort of like saying, people are focused on the radio and not focused on the songs. People are focused on the 3D representation of this stuff and not focused on the experience.
So I want to just dive in to a little bit of that, which is something I know you've worked on from a policy and a platform perspective, which is, what the economics of the metaverse could be like. I know we've talked about this extensively offline. So this stuff is where I find your view extremely compelling and very interesting. But to take the power away from the platforms like the metas and so forth, and to create these metaverse 3D internet-based environments that are inclusive and people can work and live in, because potentially metaverse will play more of a role in society in terms of, community building, collaboration, things like that, as a distraction from inequality and those sort of things. But tell me about how you think in an ideal world, we would develop the metaverse for, in terms of economically, in terms of rights in respect to content and data for individuals and corporations and things like that.
So you have to sort of ask and answer the first question is, do you believe in intellectual property rights? Like you start there. Do you believe that if an individual creates a thing, whatever that thing is, they have the right to monetize that? They have a right to give it away. They have a right to hoard it. Like, do you agree with that? And I don't know that I have a straight, clear answer on that one, but let's assume that you do believe that that is a true statement. That is to say, I create a new thing, I have the right to that thing. Because it is a digital artifact, we now know beyond a shadow of a doubt who created that thing. We know who owns that thing. We can transfer that thing. We can do whatever we want. We can license that thing. That thing is pretty straightforward, and those systems exist. Like, yes, there needs to be some evolution of those things, but ultimately that allows you to sell an asset, right? And that asset could then be used in somebody else's creation, and you can deal with any number of forms of compensation regarding the usage of that asset, right? That's when we talk about we talked about marketing, we talked about it being the exchange of value. All of a sudden, we've got some interesting ideas here, because let's say I go ahead and I'm a musical artist, I create a song. That song, I can license that song so that somebody can use it to be a soundtrack in their experience, and I can get paid either flat out, I can get paid per play, I can get paid based on whatever I want because it's all trackable, or I might pay somebody to put it in a really popular experience to get the exposure I want, right? The exchange of value is bi-directional. There's no situation where I'm just selling stuff, or sell, buy, sell, buy, sell, buy. There's the ability, you created a value exchange that allows you to go ahead and transfer those things backwards and forth. So all of a sudden, the creation of assets and the collaboration of that stuff becomes interesting, because the compensation that normally comes alongside the creation of content can be distributed based on how you contribute that. And you can negotiate that on a per asset basis if you want to. Or if you create a platform that allows for the creation of these experiences, you can take a percentage of that if you so chose. That's, again, there's no shortage of compensation models that then devolve towards the creation of content. And that gets sort of to our earlier Nike shoe example, right? Where they're going to go ahead and create content. They're going to expect some sort of compensation for it. But to the earlier point, they've been paying EA for years, as has Adidas and other companies have been paying these companies for years to put their products for product placement, right? So it's bidirectional. They're going to create these assets. Maybe you license the asset from Nike in order to be able to put the shoes in your game. Maybe Nike pays you to put the shoes in the game. Maybe you just agree that it's good for both of you and you don't charge anybody either way. Like, the exchange of value based on collaboration, creation of content is probably.
What about monetary exchange in the metaverse? What about digital money and how that might evolve in the metaverse? Any ideas on that? The use of wallets and so forth.
Yeah, currency is a thing. There needs to be currency in some form or fashion. We can talk about what that is. This gets into sort of how I think about the internet / metaverse topology sort of across the board. There are going to be areas that are controlled by brands or by individuals. These areas are going to have gates between them and other areas. Moving stuff into and out of those areas is, and this gets back to the relationship conversation we had earlier, Rob, which is understanding the relationship between two brands so that way there's agreed upon portability of stuff between. Currency is one such thing, but it could just as easily be objects or data or anything else. Moving it from one such area to another area requires agreement, a relationship, an understanding of what constitutes that stuff. We talk about the metaverse. Earlier, we talked about the idea of requiring compensation in order to be able to create a substantial amount of content. That only works if I can take that compensation out of the digital ecosystem and put it into meat space, because I can't eat bits. Like you ultimately, there's food, shelter, water, all this other stuff. Don't want to get into the idea of ultimately all that stuff becomes free. And like, I want to believe that that's a thing in the future, but in the intervening time, people need to eat. So being able to move that currency into and out of the ecosystem is probably necessary.
Listen, I'm hearing the things you're saying, and I'm just trying to imagine what our audience is thinking as they listen to this. It sounds like we're having a fairly technical conversation about the creation and exchange of value in a virtual marketplace. And it really doesn't matter. And you're using these terms interchangeably as to what the content is, right? So you use the example of a song, you use the example of an advertiser or a brand, and we're using that interchangeably. And I get that, but that's a very technical conversation, and it's a little bloodless in a way, because I'm curious about what are people actually doing in these virtual worlds, these metaverse worlds. And the reason I bring that up is that this morning, there was some news about the metaverse, which is actually worth paying attention to. I think it's quite relevant here. I've criticized many of the early metaverse launches several times on this show and other forums because they focused on business model first. And in other words, they focused on exactly the kinds of technical discussions you folks are having right now, which is, how is value created? How's it exchanged? Who's going to control it? Who's going to own the customer? Who's going to own the impressions and count them and monetize them and so forth? What they failed to do is focus on building a community. In other words, giving people a reason to be there in the first place and making it really fun and engaging and giving them fun things to do. And I'm referring specifically to worlds like Decentraland and Sandbox. The idea there was if we build a platform and we figure out the marketplace and we figure out how value is created and exchanged, other people will figure out the fun stuff to do, and they'll come build those experiences on top of our platform. I bring that up because just today in Cointelegraph, there's an article that says that the value of real estate in these virtual worlds, Sandbox and Decentraland, has plummeted on average 85% since the beginning of the year.
Good time to
buy. So last year, it was a little bit of a land grab, kind of a gold rush mentality. People were rushing out to buy virtual land, kind of build their homestead on the digital frontier in the metaverse. Some folks were excited because they thought, oh boy, I can buy land that's near, some celebrity, like Snoop Dogg had some virtual land. Great, I'll get virtual land next to his. It'll be worth something. Do you really want him as a neighbor?
I wonder if he's growing virtual weed at his virtual.
Exactly, it was all kind of hyped up. The problem is you come to these towns now and there's nobody in them. There's nobody in these virtual worlds. It'll say there's 1,000 people on the server, but when you show up, you can't see anybody in sight. And so my sense is that a lot of effort's gone into analyzing the economics of these worlds. Not as much analysis has gone into how do you populate them with people and give them something fun to do. What's your
Well,
take on that?
I'm gonna bring out my Marshall McLuhan quote again. The first thing they're doing is they're trying to replicate the old paradigm in the new, and it doesn't fit. There's an infinite amount of real estate in the internet. There's an infinite amount of real estate in the metaverse, right? And that
Yeah,
means that the
true.
scarcity model of real estate is broken
Doesn't
from the
make sense.
get-go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right? So like if that's a scam. Like if you're trying to create artificial scarcity in a digital realm,
Yeah.
like people are like,
If
this'll be
anything,
great.
if
This'll be
anything,
great.
no.
But to your point, there's community is important, but that isn't predicated on what land you own.
Yeah.
That's the relationship we're talking about. And that gets back to what I'm talking about. What's important here is the relationship. What's important here is the network of relationships between people that are going to do things and collaborate together and all this other stuff, and creating systems and spaces that allow people to collaborate, create content, consume content collaboratively. That's what matters. And so when you talk about a 3D shared consensual, really? Like that's what you're focused on? You're focused on trying to replicate the old world in the new? Like, sure, you can do that. Go ahead and do that. Like people need to do that in order to be able to find their feet, right? The shared sporting event or the shared concert, those are great experiences and they're fun and they're engaging and immersive and they bring all sorts of value and they're fantastic, right? But you think about some of the stuff that's happening with some of those events, which are carrying it far beyond what you can see just by going to a concert or by going to a sporting event. The idea of seeing the sporting event from every player's point of view is so different than actually just passively watching the sporting event on whatever camera the director decides. Now we're starting to evolve that into something that's far more interesting. And so what you're really talking about when you talk about real estate, or you talk about, I'm going to regret this, somebody is going to take me to task with it. You talk about NFTs or anything that's creating artificial scarcity in a digital landscape is destined to fail, has to fail, because what it's doing is it's gatekeeping. It's being exclusive rather than inclusive, which hammers home your point, Rob, which is it is about the relationships between people. You want to be collaborative. You want to be more inclusive, not less inclusive. So gatekeeping, real estate, all the things that are exclusive by nature have to fail.
Yeah, I think ultimately this is like at the heart of the debate of where we go as a society. It's not just metaverse. I mean, if you look at the problems that we're going to have to deal with, over the next 30 years, sea level rise, food scarcity, displacement of eco-refugees, access to healthcare, all of those things. This question of inclusivity versus scarcity, from an economics perspective, is, I think, at the heart of human philosophy in terms of where the species goes, right? It's bigger than the metaverse, because ultimately, we are going to come to an inflection point or a decision point, a fork in the road, if you like, for the human species over the next 30 years, where we have to decide to double down on a system of scarcity based on capitalism that creates massive inequality and two different classes of people, very, very rich and extremely poor, subsisting on UBI, or we're going to have to rethink the way our economics work for society in terms of inclusivity. There's no functional reason why the economy today, for example, can't provide access to housing, healthcare, education, and food for everyone. So the question is, why don't we do that today? Well, this is an economic or social philosophy that we've developed over the last few hundred years around capitalism, et cetera, right? And I think an advanced human species, any advanced species, will eventually come to the point where you don't prioritize economics over human well-being, right? You don't prioritize the health of the planet over, making money. But that's where we're at today. And I think this is where we're in the last gasps of the system. It could take another 50 years to completely evolve on it. But it just seems to me that the human species, to take it to the next level, we have to get rid of this sort of concept of scarcity. I mean, is that too big picture?
The question that it probably is for the scope of the conversation, but having said that, why replicate that in the metaverse?
Right.
You don't have
Right.
to, right? Which is what, to get to your real estate thing, Rob, why would you do that? Why would you limit the number of things that somebody can enjoy or experience? Why would you do that?
Well, you can see what they're doing. It's your Marsh McLuhan thing. They're transposing an existing business model that everyone understands from the real world into a virtual environment. But you're quite right. It's not a good transposition. Like, it doesn't actually make economic sense to do it that way. But what you're driving at is interesting to me, and it kind of goes back to the point that Britt was making a minute ago. You're really wanting to talk about relationships. You're less interested in the tech. What we have in the digital world is digitally mediated relationships, for better or for worse. Like right now, you and I aren't sitting in a room talking. That'd be one thing. We're not doing that. We have Zoom going on. So we have Zoom in between us, but it connects us together, even though we're in different places. So that is, it's kind of a win. We get a benefit there. Tell me a little bit about how digital technology has tell me a little bit about how digital technology has changed the way people relationships work, and maybe disrupted the traditional sense of relationships.
So I think it's distilled it quite a bit. I think while we've gained some stuff and we've lost some stuff, right? The truth of the matter is, I met my wife on the internet, right? I didn't meet her in a bar. I didn't meet her at a party. I didn't meet her in a club. She lived literally across the country. And I met her in a virtual space, right? Playing a game. And you think about how common that is nowadays. You talk about people who have created relationships online who have never met each other in physical proximity that consider themselves very, very good friends. So in many ways, you and I have never met in person, Rob. However, you and I have had what I consider to be an extraordinarily meaningful conversation that's been very, very beneficial to me. And I think that is really distilling the relationship down. It's not worrying about the physical presence. It's not worrying about our socioeconomic status. It's not worrying about whether I'm sitting in a small room or a large house. It's not worrying, it doesn't matter where I am. And so I think in many ways, it has equalized a great deal. Now, there are costs, right? There are costs and there are barriers, and we want to get to a point where everybody has equal access to such things, right? Where people have access to devices and access to internet and access to things that allow people to carry on these relationships and conversations and so on and so forth. There's also been some downside to it, right? There's been, obviously the level of harassment and toxicity, the idea of all of these things that physical proximity tends to inhibit you walking up to somebody and being horrible to them, right? Because
people can say things online that they would never say to someone's face.
Now, you could view that as a good thing and a bad thing. There is the ability for a teenager to explore who they are, the ability of people to understand the relationships they have, the ability for people to experience environments that are not theirs, that could be oppressive or otherwise, right? The ability to gain knowledge
or liberating, depending. Or liberating.
Right? Exactly. And so
one of the things we found in online games is that people love to experiment. They try different genders, different identities. And that seems to be not everybody, but a pretty significant chunk of the people who are playing games. They want to explore different aspects of their personality. I think that's a cool thing. So it's liberating for some folks, for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's what we're talking about.
I'm mindful of the fact that we're running out of time. We've got about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
And what I normally like to do at this point of the conversation is get a bit more, sci-fi and a bit more futurist. And Glenn, I know you've read a ton of sci-fi, and even though you don't consider yourself a futurist, you've always been on this leading edge of technology. So I want to project out a little bit beyond this conversation around the metaverse and look maybe 30, 40, 50 years in the future. what is it that excites you about the future? What do you think? What do you see coming down the line that you sort of can't wait to see us develop as humans from a technology perspective that you think will be hugely transformative?
So I'll start with, I'd like to see much more accessibility, just sort of in general. And I think that things are slowly moving in that direction. But when I talk about accessibility, I am talking about it sort of financially and all these other things, all the barriers there, but I'm also talking about physical accessibility. One of the things that I've been hypothesizing lately is the ability for colorblind people to carry their settings, I'm going to call them settings for lack of a better phrase, across everything that they experience, right? So the idea that one of the things,
that makes sense.
I've got a number of friends who play a lot of video games with me, and a couple of them are colorblind. And one of the things that drives them absolutely crazy is having to configure the game every single time they go to a new game, right?
Oh,
and everybody's
yeah.
colorblindness is different. Like that's one of the things that I sort of learned over the last couple of years. And it's different in fairly meaningful, significant ways. But that's true of all disability, and it's true of all accessibility issues. And so the ability of an individual to experience things to the level that they want to, or or choose to do so, I think is super interesting and super exciting to me. And I want to see a lot more of that. Another thing that is removing barriers, just linguistic, like all of this stuff may seem fairly trivial, but just linguistic software that allows people that speak different languages to communicate with each other in much easier ways, much more meaningful ways. There's a bunch of stuff that has to do with identity, portability of identity, and identity just sort of in general. And I know that these are concepts rather than hard tech and whatever it is, but from a concept perspective, I love the idea of people being able to create relationships sort of around the world without leaving their home if they can't or don't want to, or any of those other things. So I think those are kind of the big ones for me: identity, accessibility.
What about the idea of creating a relationship with a personality that doesn't exist? I'm a digital human. I've made the prediction that in the next 5 years, you'll have a meaningful conversation with a person who does not exist. That is to say, an artificially generated personality. What do you think of that idea in terms of the future of relationships?
I think that it's inevitable. I'm not going to get
kind of nirvana for brands, right? Like for brands, that's what they're aiming for, is to have some full-time digital personality working for them, hawking their wares.
Well, no, that's not the end goal of a brand. But putting that aside, I think ultimately the vision is ultimately the trusted advisor, the person that can provide, that can meet need states in a meaningful way. Like that's where I think the value of that really is, right? A doctor that really does know every single symptom and all this other stuff is
way better at diagnostics.
Way better at diagnostics
exactly.
and all this other stuff. That would be better, right? The same thing is true of auto mechanics, or like people that can evaluate scenarios and provide good advice is really law. Tax. Like these are all things. And in the gaming industry, I've been like hypothesizing that as NPCs that run alongside you and offer you advice as you're playing, like wouldn't using, natural language.
Like a golf caddy.
Exactly. Like you have a golf caddy. Why would you not have one in Tiger Woods golf? Like, why would you not?
League of Legends caddy.
Exactly. But
or a virtual Navy SEAL when you're playing your first person shooter, right?
Whatever that is, like just the idea of actually improving the experience by tapping into all of that knowledge in real time in natural language to allow people to actually create, like, that's where I think the value is. Like I think you kind of skewed it in a little different direction, but going to Home Depot and asking how to fix a faucet, like You always
Yeah,
go
and
to
you
the
could have
person.
your augmented reality glasses because home improvement expert there with you, showing you which things to take and everything. Yeah, that could be really interesting.
All these things are
I like that.
like it's assisted, and so in that way, I think it's inevitable, but I also think it's welcome. Like now, whether or not I'm going to have a deep, meaningful relationship with an AI, like I'm still noodling on that. I'm not going to say no because people will do what people do, but in terms of
Brett and I are
AI
fans of
individual.
Hatsukini Miku, and she's been married 1,700 times now to single Japanese men. So clearly,
It
you can have
sounds
a
very
relationship.
much like her, right? Yeah.
God
you can
bless.
have a relationship with a virtual character.
What
Well,
does alimony and palimony look like in that situation?
Yeah. Well, Miku is a $7 billion brand now, so
So
I think
she's
she's
making
doing
more
fine.
money than making more money than her husband's.
Although on a distributed basis, yeah. It's obviously I've been talking about Hatsune Miku for many years, but there's an estimate that came out from Huawei a few weeks ago. I don't know if you guys saw, but I put in an article recently I wrote. There's going to be 75 billion virtual humans by 2030. That's their estimate.
There are more than that many bots on the internet today committing ad fraud. So I find that to be too low by far.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. But digital humans is an interesting term, and what rights will digital humans have? That's a topic for another show. And Glenn, thank you for being on The Futurist this week. How can people stay in touch with you and follow your musings on the future or game with you, in the virtual world?
Justicar, JUSTICAR on Twitter, and it's my gamer tag on Xbox. Or you can ping me at marketingtechnerd@gmail.com.
Awesome.
Well, it was great to meet you.
Great to meet you too, Rob. Thank you very much for all the thinking.
Well, that's it for another week of The Futurists. If you like the show, don't forget to give us a 5-star review. Give us a shout out on social media or in the metaverse, I guess. We're not in the metaverse yet, Rob. We got to fix that. We got to have the Futurist presence in the metaverse. Well, we could be, yeah. But make sure, leave us a review, give us some comments, give us some feedback. That's how people get to know about the show. Please follow us on Twitter if you're on that platform, and likewise on Facebook and LinkedIn, where it's the Futurist Network. But my thanks to Kevin Hersham, who has helped us in the audio chair this week, Elizabeth Severance, Sylvie and Carlo on the social media side, and to my co-host, Robert, obviously. We will be back with you next week. But until then, we will see you in the future.
In the future.
That's it for this week. If you like the show, make sure to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform, or share it with a friend, or share it on social media.
We'll see you again next week with more Breaking Banks.